Okay, thank you so much. Now we will go to the keynote speech by Dr. or Professor Anthony Magana as a digital learning pioneer in the year 1995. He has created and served as principal of Washington State's first cyber school. He authored a best-selling book entitled Enhancing the Art and Science of Teaching with Technology. And also then he published another book entitled Disruptive Classroom Technologies. In addition, he will have a new book about learning in the zone. In addition to all these contributions also, he contributed that much at the international and the American levels. So you are more than welcome, Professor Sonny or Anthony, and the platform is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Thank you very kindly for the very kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to come and speak at this esteemed event. All my friends call me Sonny, so you are now my friends, so please call me Sonny. I am a simple teacher, and that means that I view my work through the lens of a practitioner as well as a researcher. I think it's important that we embrace the artistry of pedagogy and balance that with the science of learning, and that's what I'm trying to do. So in my remarks today, and thank you very much for that comment. I appreciate it. Keep the chat going. I think it's important that we have turn this into a conversation. In fact, that's the whole point. Learning should be discursive, and yet for too many learning environments, particularly in pre-service education, we walk into lecture halls and the conversation is a monologue. There's only one person talking, and that should change. We should change our learning systems from systems of monologues to dialogues. And let me share my screen, and I'll go a little more detailed on what I mean by that and why that's important. So, by the way, I'm in Washington State, my home state of Washington, where I live. So it's morning for me. So I would say good morning for if you were here, but since it's afternoon for you, I'm going to say good afternoon. There we go. Okay, and let me shrink this. So my remarks today are going to be coming through my experience, both as a teacher, a principal, professor, but mostly through the lens of a learner. I think that's really important. We have to have different frames by which we explore things, and so this is through the lens of a learner and learning how to learn. I'm very honored to have worked with some remarkable educational researchers, Michael Fullen, Dr. Robert Marzano, Professor John Hattie, and they have been tremendous guides in my life. So I want to start off with this idea. In 1961, American President John F. Kennedy implored the nation to galvanize its best resources, its best thinking, its best creativity, its best imagination, and imagine landing a human being on the moon. It was an extraordinary event, a watershed event, but it galvanized the nation to expand their limitations on their own imagination. And that's what we need right now. I think we need more imagination in our learning systems and imagine what's possible. So I'm going to give you a glimpse of what's possible. But President Kennedy came up with this idea of moonshot thinking. He didn't, but as a result of his work, the idea of doing something so extraordinarily out of the realm of what we think is possible. And that's what we need. The great hockey player Wayne Gretzky said, "You never make the shots you don't take." You never make the shots you don't take. We got to take a moonshot, because if we don't take a moonshot, our students, our systems, our learning systems, our societies will suffer from the tyranny of backwards thinking, regressive thinking. So I call this Project Moonshot EDU because it's an audacious goal. The audacious goal is to double learning achievement. And in learning systems. Now I'm going to say that again. The goal of Project Moonshot, it sounds wild, hairy, and audacious, to double learning and achievement in school systems. And that's why universities and colleges of education would be well served to pay attention. I'm very thankful for my professor TÜZDER to mention my books. My remarks today are going to focus on these two books, Disruptive Classroom Technologies, in which I introduced a framework for education called the T3 Framework for Education. And my newest book, Learning in the Zone, in which I introduce a new concept to the literature, and I call that concept meta-learning. So the subtitle is The 7 Habits of Meta-Learning. Let me explain that a little bit. I think we need a richer vocabulary of learning. I think we need to ask students, we need to ask teachers, we need to ask everybody, how do you learn? How do you learn? How do you optimize how you learn? And I define meta-learning as the process of optimizing, learning how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Human beings are creatures of habit. We take on habits. Some of those habits are helpful and constructive, some not so much. So it's important for our systems to recognize that learning is very multifaceted, and it's a process of transitioning or transferring learning, unlearning, and relearning, and doing it with fluidity so that a learner in the future knows what to do when one doesn't know what to do. In my first book, I introduced a framework for innovation, and my remarks are going to really focus on this framework, the T3 framework for innovation. The T3 stands for the 3 domains of learning: translational learning, transformational learning, and transcendent learning. So again, I want to have a richer vocabulary, richer language of learning. And this framework helps us make sense of and contextualize the different phases of knowledge acquisition, old knowledge acquisition, and new knowledge generation. And each of the domains has a set of principles. So under the translational domain of learning, the principles are automation and consumption. And when I say translational learning, what I mean is that students will consume some external information or knowledge and translate it into their own internal language, their own self-talk, their own cognitive schema. And that's a process we still don't fully understand. It's a bit of a black box, but we're learning more. However, I think it's safe to say that right now, for example, you're taking in the information that I'm providing you, and you're connecting it to some prior experience or knowledge or cognitive schema in your brains. And that's how we make sense of things. That's an important phase. The translational phase is when students acquire new vocabulary, new facts, and new ideas that were once unknown to them. Typically, the strategies that are assisting students in the translation phase, memorization and the ability to encode new information into longer-term memory systems. But that's different from understanding. In order to have deeper understanding, we need to go to the transformational phase of learning. The transformational phase of learning is when students take that internal information that's in their own internal language and express it, pull it out. It's drawn out so that students can express and represent their understanding, the connections that they make between the current knowledge that they are experiencing, their past knowledge, and connecting it to some future knowledge potentiality. The 2 domains in transformational learning are production and contribution. But we mustn't stop there. We must also help students be able to solve future learning problems where they engage in a scientific methodology to identify wicked problems that matter to them, investigate the issues and implications of those wicked real-world problems, and then imagine solutions to those real world problems. I was very pleased to hear the prior speaker talk about service-based learning. In the transcendent domain of learning, students take the knowledge they acquire in classrooms and transfer it into real world contexts to solve wicked real life problems that matter to them. And I love that term, wicked real life problem. It's not my term. I wish it was. Rattel and Weber came up with that term in the 1970s to describe a problem that's so complicated, so multifaceted, important, and yet still unresolved. That's what a wicked problem is. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit, but let me tell you what the research says. I started researching the impact of technology on learning and teaching in 1983. So I'm much, I don't know, I suppose I was very young when I started. I was a new teacher. And the very first research study I did was involved an Apple IIe computer and a software program called the Oregon Trail. There's a variety of software programs. So I've been researching the phenomena of technology in learning for now 5 decades, and which again, I'm not as old as I look. I started out when I was very young. But here's what we found. I have the great honor of working with Professor John Hattie, and his wonderful book, Visible Learning, is a must-read. I'm sure you have it. I'm sure you're familiar with it. But he has popularized a scientific statistical methodology that was invented by Professor Jean V. Glass called effect size, meta-analysis, and looking at multiple studies to expand sample size and get closer to the truer nature of relationships. So Hattie says quite astutely, and I think quite correctly, that effect size is the most reliable way to determine impact on student achievement. And he gives us a scale, an odometer, if you will, to determine what influences will have a neutral effect on learning, a negative effect on learning, and a positive effect on learning. The 0.4 is a representation of the effect size of 0.4 represents the take a teacher at the 50th percentile, a student at the 50th percentile. That's the average quantity of learning that the average student will attain in an average year. So of all the 260 influences Hattie studied, 0.4 is the average. So one can expect then that the average student would acquire 1 year's worth of content in an average school year, and that's represented as an effect size of 0.4. Anything below, undesirable, including things that go into reverse effects. What we should be focusing on are strategies that lie in what he calls the zone of desired effects, things that have higher probability of having a positive impact on learning. Now, when it comes to technology, what I'm about to share with you may surprise you, may shock you. What is the average effect of technology on student learning? Is it at that 0.4 level, the average? Do you think it's below? Do you think it's above? Take a moment, just kind of hypothesize. What is the average effect of technology on learning? Now, remember, we have in our hands the technologies that far surpass the computing power of the computers that landed Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon in our hands right now. That's a remarkable evolution of technology. However, the average effect of technology is a dismal 0.34. So Hattie looked at over 10,000 studies, 161 meta-analyses, and found that the average effect of computers and technology on learning is 0.34. And here's the part that's the most alarming. That effect has not changed in 50 years, despite the phenomenal advancements in technology. So since Neil Armstrong first stepped foot on the moon, the impact of technology on student learning has been dismally low and unchanged. That's my wicked problem. The wicked problem that keeps me up at night and that gets me up in the morning is shifting this phenomenon. shifting the impact of technology. And let me give you a representation. If 0.4 is the average, add technologies to the classroom, one can expect, and on average, that there will be a deleterious effect on learning. Now, I've made this remark with technology companies, and you can imagine it's not very well received, but it's the truth. This is the preponderance of evidence shows that the average impact of a whole variety of computer systems. Now, there's a range, as always, there's a range. Some things have higher effects, some things have lower effects, but the average is 0.34. So it begs the question, have our schools around the world fallen into the trap of technology determinism? Have schools become technologically rich, but innovatively poor? And is there a thinking that if we just add technology, learning will automatically be transformed? That's what I mean by technological determinism. If we have tech, learning will come. I think that is a multi-billion-dollar question, because we spend billions of dollars on technologies in schools, but we have not yet gotten a return on investment. So therein lies the wicked problem. Why? Why do we have such a low return on investment in technology? And this is something that I've been studying, again, since the 1980s. And I think I can explain it using this graph. School systems around the world, I think, have been engaged in what I call a planar shift, where we are migrating from an industrial age education system to a digital age education system. And all we've done is taken the existing pedagogical model and added technology on top of it. The current pedagogical model that we are experiencing is called tell and practice, where teachers tell students what to memorize, and students go and dutifully memorize it. So we've privileged memorizing old knowledge and just added technology onto this knowledge transmission model, where teachers fill students' heads with knowledge. Students exercise their short-term memory systems. They're working in shorter-term memory systems and regurgitate what they've memorized on some type of formative assessment or summative assessment. Adding technology to that does not yield any transformational results. I think what we need is an axial shift. We need to shift our thinking from just adding tech to the existing pedagogy and rather re-engineering the pedagogical model that sits underneath. So we need to shift from a pedagogy that privileges memorizing old knowledge to a system that privileges whole child and whole system mastery and well-being. And that's the essence of this book, Disruptive Classroom Technologies, is helping provide guidance for how you make that journey from systems that are very staid and traditional, that prioritize memorying old knowledge at the expense of knowledge generation and knowledge transfer in real-world contexts. So I'm a musician. I really learned how to learn by learning how to play my favorite form of music, which is rock and roll. So I can synthesize my research from 1984 into a very simple rock and roll metaphor, is that when it comes to modern teaching and learning in the industrial age, high impact pedagogy is the melody, and high impact technology use adds the harmonies, and together you get great music. See, I think technology has to play a secondary role. It's not the main actor. It's a supporting actor. But the main actor should be a pedagogy of the 21st century that is focused on learning. Meta learning is the literacy for this century and beyond, I think, helping students learn how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And the T3 framework is such a pedagogy I would submit, humbly submit. So I'll tell you a little story of how I came up with this notion. First of all, the term educate is derived from the Latin word educere, which means literally to draw out from within. So we should be drawing out understanding and cognizance and meaning from students. But what we do in learning systems is we fill students with knowledge. We transmit knowledge, and as though the student were an empty vessel, and they play a passive role in memorizing old knowledge. Not everyone, there's qualifiers, but if you look at the average teachers in average classrooms, it is a knowledge transmission model, which is the opposite of the intent of the word educere. So for me, when I was in school, I sadly saw that there was a distinction between learning and schooling. In schooling, I was learning how to conform and learning how to behave and learning how to memorize. I got really good at memorizing. But I wanted to emulate my idols, which were the Beatles. I was of the age where when the Beatles hit New York City, I was mesmerized, and I had to learn those songs. Something in me was compelled. Something was awakened, I suppose. I felt compelled to learn how to produce the sounds of the Fab Four, and I really wanted to learn how to play the guitar. Now, if anyone's a musician, if you're a self-taught musician like myself, that's an arduous journey. It's a hard journey, but it was so compelling, and I was learning music, and in the process, I learned how I learn best. I learned new habits. I learned new strategies. I was able to immediately determine whether those strategies were having an impact because the feedback of my instrument, like I knew whether I was hitting a G chord or my fingers were buzzing. So around at the age 14 or so, I was getting pretty good at translating songs from the radio onto my 6-string guitar, and I'd be sitting around the campfire playing these songs. And then I heard this gentleman, Eddie Van Halen, and the first album, Van Halen 1, just completely rocked my world. I had no idea that those kinds of tones could be made from a guitar. And I happened to hear Eddie Van Halen on a radio station talking about learning how to play guitar. And he said, look, for all you budding guitarists out there, if you're sitting around the campfire playing songs that you know and playing the same songs over and over, that's great. You got to start there. Everyone has started there. But if you stay at that stage, just playing the same songs, doing the same things over and over, you're not going to get better. You're actually going to get a little worse. You'll pick up bad habits. You got to constantly learn. And he said, so just know that you're in a stage. He said, I call that the campfire stage. You're in a stage where you're sitting around a campfire, strumming open chords and singing Country Roads and John Denver and Beatles songs. But he said, if you want to get better, you got to go through another stage. He said, I call that the Chuck Berry phase of learning how to play guitar. He said, every great guitarist has gone through the Chuck Berry phase, where you're learning the pentatonic blues scale up and down the neck. You can transpose them. You need to learn that like the back of your hand. You need to memorize all those licks so that you could play them fluidly and improvise. You got to learn the rules before you can break the rules. He said, every great guitarist has gone through the Chuck Berry phase. But he said, there's another phase where you start to create your own sound. You explore your own form of expression, musically, emotionally, lyrically. And that's a way you find your expression, do something that no one else has done. So he created a framework for me that helped me contextualize my own musical journey. It's the first time anyone ever provided a framework to help me make sense and meaning out of my learning journey. And that is absolutely the inspiration for the T3 framework for innovation. See, translational learning, if we teach in a translational way, we're using technologies to just digitize teaching and learning the tell and practice pedagogy. It's like playing Country Roads over and over and over and over. You're not going to get better. You're stuck in a phase. So I tell teachers, look, just keep doing what you're doing. But in order to get better, you got to go through another phase, just like Eddie shared with me. It's funny, I've never met him, and unfortunately he passed, so I never got a chance to thank him, but I think I'm honoring his legacy with my work in some ways. So to translate literally means to ferry some knowledge across a different mode or medium or modality. And I think in the translational phase, what too many folks are doing is simply taking an existing pedagogical model and translating it from an analog environment to a digital environment. Now, we saw that during the horror of the COVID pandemic, which is still wreaking havoc. It's a tragedy But I'm hopeful, because of science, that we are entering an outro phase of the COVID pandemic. When we shifted to online learning, it was an unmitigated disaster. There were some bright spots, but generally speaking, it was an unmitigated disaster, because simply lecturing like on a Zoom is not an effective use of the technology or learners or teachers' time. So we need to realize that that's part of it, but we mustn't stop there. We need to be able to engage in transformational learning, where students are fundamentally transformed. Their knowledge or their cognizance is transformed. Let me explain what I mean by that. In the transformational domain of learning, I have identified two principles. The first principle is production. Using these remarkable tools, why not have students learn how to produce representations of their thinking journeys and the destinations of those journeys, to capture student thinking using digital artifacts, where students can represent what they know, why they think they know it, and the journey from nonsense to sense, from chaos to control, from misunderstanding and misapprehension to deep conceptual understanding and capacity to transfer that knowledge in new contexts. John Hattie's wonderful visible learning model has three phases of learning: surface learning, deeper learning, and knowledge transfer. And he very kindly reviewed my research, my work, and said that the T3 framework advances the visible learning model a major step forward, because it's the student work, the student learning, that's at the core of my belief system and value system and even pedagogical approach. How do we use technology to help students represent what they're thinking? In the production principle, under the production principle rather, I have three specific strategies. And in my book, I go into more detail on those strategies. I'll just tell you what they are now. The first is students have to produce some personal mastery goal where they know what they need to understand or be able to do. And then they need to commit. So that what the first meta-learning habit from learning in the zone is students have to commit, any learner has to commit to that learning outcome. Like I really wanted to learn the song Imagine. So I committed myself to contorting my fingers and getting blisters and calluses on my fingertips to play something because I really wanted to learn it. Well, that's not uncommon. When students really want to do something, they stick with it because they're compelled by their commitment. And when students produce a personal mastery goal, they're composing what they aspire to understand or be able to do. The second strategy, once they've established a personal learning goal, committed to that goal, the second strategy is a series of self-regulation strategies. So I've developed a series of tools and resources for learners to manage their emotional state by self-regulation, a feedback mechanism. Manage their effort, how much effort they're expending, and regulating their effort. The self-regulation is a very high effect size on Hattie's scale, but it's not something that we often teach students to engage in emotional self-regulation or effort regulation. And here's why that's important. In the surface learning phase, where students are just memorizing, there's not a lot of emotion that's impacted when we're just memorizing information. But when we go deeper, when we go to that transformational phase and students are engaged in extending their cognition and thinking and learning deeply, it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of our energy resources. And when we hit a brick wall, our emotions tend to slide to a negative phase where it's uncomfortable, where we don't like it. It's negative, and so there's a tendency to quit or to give up. That's when emotional regulation helps students to recognize, okay, what strategies can I do to help me get through this difficult deep learning pit? Our emotions drop down and we're in this like deeper learning pit. There's a number of strategies, including something called interleaving, where students can focus on one heavy cognitive concept, and then if they get stuck, they need to go somewhere else. That's a really powerful way for students to become self-efficacious, to develop their own sense of efficacy by knowing what to do when they struggle. The third strategy is to have students then build digital representations and express their learning using digital tools. 3 strategies, all student directed. The second principle in the transformational phase of learning is something that I call contribution. I've developed a theory called contributive learning theory. And it goes like this: we learn better than we do in isolation. Students contributing to the learning of other students has a very high effect size at all 3 phases of learning. Abramson in the 70s came up with a wonderful, wonderful strategy called the jigsaw method, where students are not just cooperating, they're not just collaborating, they're contributing. They're intentionally contributing to the knowledge growth of others. And that's critically important. There are 3 strategies in the contribution principle, under the principle of contribution, where students become more interdependent in not only the organization of the classroom, but they design and create learning tutorials with the express purpose of teaching others what they know. And when students create a tutorial to teach other kids what they know using digital tools, there's a variety of free and readily available tools for students to build a little tutorial. YouTube is a wonderful opportunity for students to show what they know. And in fact, you don't have to teach kids how to use YouTube. But I've yet to see a student who doesn't want to be a YouTube star. That's the thing now. Being a content creator, being a YouTube star is a career. So why not have kids, learners, and why not in colleges of education, explore having teachers help students create tutorials to teach others what they know. And in the process, they're going to galvanize their understanding and consolidate their deeper understanding. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, what if kids make mistakes? What if they don't really understand the content? That's okay, because a very natural process in learning is to correct errors, to debug our thinking. And so when students create a tutorial, even if it has mistakes, they need to be able to discuss it, understand why that's an error, so they identify a misconception. Then they can clarify what that misconception is, and then rectify it. 3 strategies, all focused on students learning how to learn. And it's one of the meta-learning habits is crafting one's own contributive partnerships, a community, contributive learning communities. But then we mustn't stop there. We need to go above and beyond. And that's what I call the transcendent phase of learning, when school systems prepare students more effectively for the future that they're about to experience. I think there'd be no doubt that the depth of change and the pace of change that students are experiencing is so great. It's greater than at any other point in human history. And it's only increasing with globalization and the technologization, if that's not even a word, but the increase of technology systems, globalization. We're able to communicate and connect with peoples and places and all over the world like never before. So it's important that students use the knowledge that they gain in our classrooms and understand that that knowledge is a tool. When knowledge is applied to solve a problem, that's literally the definition of technology. A technology is the application of scientific knowledge to solve a problem. So in a way, what I'm suggesting is that the knowledge and empathy that students have, students' heads and hearts, that's the technology that's the most important right now. But it's latent. It sits in classrooms where students are simply just memorizing information, practicing, repracticing, repeating, re-repeating. We're not tapping into the technology that matters the most, the heads and hearts of students in classrooms. Now, I was talking with Professor Hattie the other day, and he said they did a massive survey of students to ask how they feel about schooling. So can you guess what the #1 emotion learners have is about student? The #1 emotion that students have about learning. Do you know what that is? Boredom. Boredom. I think it's a travesty. Kids are bored to tears, memorizing and rememorizing and practicing and without really going deeper or applying that knowledge. And so I wanted to provide an opportunity for systems to have a language, a common language of knowledge transfer in real world context. And that's what I call transcendent learning. This is learning that goes above and beyond the normal range of expectations and limitations of our education system. So there are two strategies in this phase, and I've been doing this with graduate students, undergraduate students, high school students, even primary grade students. Inquiry design. Inquiry design is a powerful idea where students are learning the scientific, they're becoming scientists by applying the scientific method. Instead of just memorizing the scientific method for some compliance, why not have learners actually become scientists and engage in the process of deep observation, problem understanding, creating a problem statement, and then focusing their inquiry around addressing a particular problem and finding out the true nature of a solution that might solve that problem. So inquiry design there are 3 strategies in this principle. So inquiry design is a principle. I think too often let me stop for a moment and say, project-based learning has gotten very, very popular, very, very popular. And a lot of institutions are pushing the idea that project-based learning and even project and problem-based learning is wonderfully effective. It is not. It is not. The effect size of PBL, project-based learning, is dismally low, very, very small. There's a number of reasons for that. Typically in a project-based learning experience, it is the teacher that gives students a project to complete. The teacher provides an inquiry that they want students to inquire about. And it's like following a recipe. That's not really effective. Students are just kind of following a well-defined sequence of tasks to do. It's important to start off with, but then we need to shift and have students craft their own inquiry. Humans are by nature inquirers. I think we come out of the womb with the capacity to inquire. It's part of our genetic identity. I think what we need to do as teachers, not teach inquiry, because inquiry is going to happen. What we need to do is help students refine the strategies that they use for the inquiry process at different stages. So helping students understand the power of inquiry design, where they're designing their own learning and inquiry pathway using the scientific method, is very powerful. But it's messy. There are no neat corners. There has to be some boundaries and some guidance. So I've developed a series of tools and resources to help students engage in the inquiry design process and continue forward. The next principle in the transcendent phase is what I call social entrepreneurship. And that's where it's really kind of a mashup of social justice and entrepreneurship. When students apply their learning to imagine solutions to wicked problems that matter to them, they are fully invested in the process and are learning the very powerful skill of knowledge transfer from the classroom to real life situations, which has been extraordinarily absent in our learning systems. Knowledge transfer from the classroom to a real world situation. And wicked problems provide real world wicked problems, provide a wonderful crucible for students to generate and test hypotheses in a meaningful way to make improvements in their world. I think social entrepreneurship is the engine for the new economy of the third millennium, not just the 21st century. I mean, we're already 22 years into the 21st century, and still we have teaching methods that look remarkably similar to those from the 19th century. We need to prepare students for the future, which is going to be, even more technological. So we need to have kids understand science, understand the implications and the ethics of science and technology. Otherwise, we run the risk of being beholden to our technological advancements. It's the head and the heart. That's the technology that matters the most. And so when students are identifying wicked problems that matter to them and then providing solutions, they are in fact contributing to making the world a better place. UNESCO's Sustainable Development Goals are 17 domains of wicked problems. And I work all over the world with students exploring that wonderful resource. And kids are interested in social justice. They're interested in promoting democracy. They're interested in reducing human trafficking, in improving quality of education. They care deeply. So we need to have structures that allow students to channel their care, their compassion, and their passions in making improvements in their world. Now that goes above and beyond the general expectations and limitations for education. That's why I think it's so important. Now, I think transformational learning helps students master current learning problems so that they learn how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. The transcendent domain helps students apply that knowledge in new contexts so that they recognize that school and knowledge acquisition is not the end, it's a means. Knowledge gain is a means to making the world a better place. So you might be asking, okay, well, what's the impact? How good is this stuff? Is it this just esoteric and academic? Well, no. There's compounding evidence that the strategies in the T3 framework have an effect size of 1.6 and higher. This is work that I've been doing for the past 40 years. It's recently been peer reviewed. And I'm going to say that again, an effect size of 1.6. It almost sounds too good to be true, but that's equivalent to a quadrupling of learning productivity. That's an additional 4 years of achievement in 1 year. Now, compounding evidence that's been peer reviewed strongly suggests that not only is an effect size of 1.6 possible, it's probable when our systems shift from systems that privilege memorizing old knowledge to systems that help students learn how to learn, unlearn, and relearn, and then transfer that learning into solving real world problems. A quadruple, that's a good word. A recent report from UNESCO, same August body, suggested that globally, the disruptions caused by the COVID pandemic have wreaked havoc on the learning lives of students, with the most marginalized and impoverished learners faring the worst. But this UNESCO report suggested that the disruptions caused by school closures and the uncertainty around school closing has erased 20 years of academic gain globally, on average, erased 20 years. So we find ourselves as educators facing a chasm. We're looking into the abyss. Students are coming back into schools with pronounced learning deficits. Kids that are coming into 4th grade are coming in with 1st grade capacities. Kids going into 8th grade are coming in with 5th grade capacities. The disruption to learning is pronounced, and no one has been immune. But the students that have suffered the most are marginalized, impoverished learners. So what if, you got to use your imagination here, what if we were able to double academic achievement? You never make the shots you don't take. So the T3 framework provides a highly reliable pedagogical model for accelerating students' achievement by accelerating their capacity to learn how they learn. Now, even if we only double academic achievement, quadrupling is possible. In fact, we even saw effect sizes that were higher. in the study, effect size of 2.0 and 3.0. If anybody's interested, email me and I'll send you the study. But my work was recently peer-reviewed and published in the University of Oxford's Research Encyclopedia for Education, which is an honor that it's hard to say if anyone really deserves that honor, but somebody has to. So again, I'm just a simple teacher, and yet what I've discovered about deeply reflecting on my own process of learning how to play guitar seems to have quite impactful transfer into learning anything. So I would suggest, when you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. You teach a man how to fish, he eats for a lifetime. If you fill a kid's head with knowledge, they'll learn for a day. But if you help kids learn how to learn, unlearn, and relearn, they'll learn for a lifetime. Here's some kind comments from colleagues, people that I don't consider them peers because I think they're in a league far above me. But Professor Michael Fullan is just a remarkable thinker, just a great educational philosopher. And he very kindly reviewed my work and said that the T3 framework is a brilliant breakthrough in our understanding and use of technology in the learning space. And he said, for those of us on the frontier of deeper learning, it's a much needed gift. I was very grateful and still humbled by that remark. But who am I to disagree with Michael Fullan? We need to do new things in new ways and stop doing old things in new ways. My mentor and friend Robert Marzano said that this work on the T3 framework and learning of the zone has the potential to set the foundations for the new pedagogy of the 21st century, shifting from memorizing old knowledge to whole child and whole system mastery and well-being. Learning is the literacy for the 21st century and beyond. And then John Hattie said that the T3 framework is advanced understanding of visible learning, and he called me the Eddie Van Halen of learning, which again, I would never say that about myself, but who am I to argue with John Hattie? It was very, very kind of him. So now, how do you learn more about this? And I think I'm going to save some time for questions here, so I'll look in the chat. But how do you go about doing this work? Well, I would suggest start by reading these works, Disruptive Classroom Technologies, and then Learning in the Zone, and then craft processes to expand our pre-service education systems and move away from the old tell and practice pedagogy. We have to model it. We have to model drawing out understanding, and model shifting classroom conversations from monologues to dialogues, where students are not just passively consuming information, but actively generating and contributing their knowledge to the benefit of their peers, their larger extended communities. You can contact me if you want. Take this QR code, and it'll take to my area on the in the interwebs called MaganaEducation.com. And you can contact me if you're interested. I'd be happy to send you some of the research, some of the findings. I'm constantly writing papers and engaging in speaking engagements on implementing this. Because here's where we are right now. We know what to do. We know what to do. The question is, do we have the political and emotional and professional will to implement what we know works? Because it's really easy to slide back into playing Country Roads over and over and over. It's really easy. It's very seductive. It's a great song. Nothing wrong with that song. In fact, I think I've played Country Roads on 6 continents. But if we keep doing the same things, we're never really learning. We're going to be degrading our capacities. So I hope you found this worthy of criticism, and now I'll turn it over and see if we have some questions, and I think folks do have some questions. So Professor TÜZDER, are folks able to unmute and ask questions, or should we read from the
if there's any questions, so will you please start?
Oh, thank you. Dr. Pauline Bremer said, I hit the nail on the head. Dr. Bremner, thank you so much. It's very kind of you. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Robert Gordon Innovative Award. Okay, may I ask Dr. Bremner to unmute and tell me more about that? Dr. Pauline Bremner? Calling Dr. Pauline Bremner.
Hi, sorry, I was trying to unmute there. At Robert Gordon University, we worked with the Scottish Institute for Enterprise, which is now cessated, but they had an innovation award called the Scottish Student Innovation Award. And what we've done is this is for students at university.
Okay.
And there are 3 levels to it. And what we've done is we've actually embedded it into our own ecosystem, if you want to call it that. So we have the RGU Innovation Award, and you were talking about working with real world problems and wicked sort of scenarios. And if you click on the link below what I've just stated there, you'll see that we worked with the charity for one of our level 2 workshops, because there are 3 levels to the program. So it's an extracurricular adding value process to student degrees. So any student on RGU can go through and do the first level and get accredited if they fill in 100 words appropriately. Then they can come and do a level 2 interactive workshop, which is multidisciplinary, it's multicultural, and it gets them, and I hate using this term, to think out of the box, but it actually gets them to challenge themselves. But because they're working with different people from different disciplines, they're not sitting just in engineering or in fashion or in art. Yeah, they're really mixing it up and thinking about the problem, you know, from all perspectives, really. And then after they do the level 2, they can go on to be awarded a level 3 as well. But there's plenty more information on our websites at Robert Gordon University.
Well, I am delighted to hear that. I think that's really forward thinking. I just want to make some comments, and I want to ask a question, then see if anyone else wants to chime in. It sounds like you are implementing these ideas already and helping learners really kind of make improvements into the local and extended communities as a part of their education process, which is the essence of service learning. So I think that's fantastic. I love the fact that you've contextualized this into levels too, because then you can see a journey, right? Kids can learn, or I say kids, I mean the college students can see the journey and what they aspire to be. How have your undergraduate students responded to this system? If you could share
yes,
that.
I can elaborate on that. When
please.
we were partnering with the Scottish Institute for Enterprise, there was a lady called Anne Davidson's programme. Anne Davidson's now down at Cambridge University. We at Robert Gordon University, we had the highest number of students go through from Scotland, go through the programme across the time that they ran it. And when we've taken it in-house, we're getting comments back from students saying that they really feel that they've added value to their self.
Yes.
They've added value to their persona. They've added value in terms of what they will be able to do in the workplace when they graduate. And that's one of the most important things. It's one of the key ethos and messages that we have at Robert Gordon University. It's about developing competencies and skills that allow, you know, a person, I've graduated with X, but I'm able to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And I think that's the most important thing, because if you look at the World Economic Forum, you've got things like adaptability, resilience, being a creative thinker, you know, all these things are becoming so much more important now. So yeah, we're getting very good feedback from the students.
I'm not surprised, but I'm delighted to hear it. Thank you so much for that elaboration. I think ultimately we want learners to be able to know what to do when they don't know what to do. That sounds kind of funny, doesn't it? I mean, do you know what to do when you're in a situation where everything is chaos and you don't know what to do? We need learners to be able to observe, orient, decide, and act, and then evaluate the impact of those actions. That's a process for continual growth and development, not just for the external community, but I'm so glad that you talked about the student's sense of self, their own efficacy, the sense of can-do-itness. That's really remarkable. I hope we can continue this conversation, Dr. Bremner. Thank you very much for kindly elaborating on it, for your kind comments on my remarks. Somebody else would we've got another few minutes here. Any questions? I'm going to call out someone named Yehudi Bar Shalom. Thank you very much. Made you talk about the three the C's: concept, content, and context. I really like that, and I'm going to add another C: contribution. that's the C that matters, I think, the most. So I'd like you to talk about. Would you mind elaborating?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hi.
I thank you. This was mesmerizing. As I wrote, at 7 at the top of the hour, I have to leave, and I regret that. We teach something. As you say, the technology is applying science to. So there is a concept that we teach. For example, the concept is the guitar, and then the content is strummings and doing and the context is whether you want to be a rocker, and that's your contribution.
That's right.
Contribution within the context. What are you going to do with it? I train counselors, people who therapists.
Okay.
And I teach something, and I said, okay, somebody attack me, somebody tell me something, and we engage, and then I invite somebody to do that. Yeah. So part of it I did, and you gave me a new language, and there are some fresh ideas that I really want to look into your material, because there seems to be some promising ideas for higher education, as well for K and 12. It's really very exciting. I think you organized the concept of 3 T's is really, really very promising. It reminds me a bit of Donald Sean on the whole idea of reflection on action.
Yeah. Sean, of course, Sean's work looms large in my thinking. We do a lot of reflection on action, but we need to help kids be able to reflect in action, to be really reflection in action. I think has greater potential for expanding our capacities, because it helps us become more mindful of the moment we're in, the present moment, and how our past knowledge is brought to bear on that present moment. So I thank you so much. I know we're nearly at the top of the hour, but I very much appreciate your kind comments, and I hope we can continue our conversation. Please send me an email or go to my website. I would love to continue this. And this is true for everyone that's a part of this. So we're just about out of time, but any other comments?
Sonny. So in the name of the conference organizers, both HETL and TÜZDER, I would like to thank you, my friend Professor Sonny Magana, for your informative, inspiring, and enriching keynote. And we highly appreciate your contributions, and I recommend all your books to be read by our colleagues and participants. So thank you again, and we would like to see you again in our next conferences.
Well, in the words of John Lennon, thank you, and I hope I pass the audition. Thank you very much. It's really such a pleasure, and I would be delighted to come. I'm sorry I couldn't be there myself in person to meet with you. Hopefully conditions improve in the next year, and I'm really I'm very honored to be able to share these remarks with such esteemed colleagues. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Dr. Tessier. It's so nice to see you again, and look forward to seeing you down the road. Keep on rocking.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.